Good afternoon. It's Friday, the 2nd of August, 2024, just after 1 o'clock. Welcome to UK Column News. I'm your host, Mike Robinson. Joining me today by video link, we have Mark Anderson from the United States and Debbie Evans. Welcome to the programme, both. Now, we're going to get started off with Keir Starmer's announcement yesterday of a new aspect of policing in the UK that follows on from the violence that there's been on the streets over the last few days. Let's have a listen to this.
A gang of thugs got on trains and buses, went to a community that is not their own, a community grieving the most horrific tragedy, and then proceeded to throw bricks at police officers who just 24 hours earlier had been having to deal with an attack on children in their community. And let me be clear, the meeting this afternoon was not about pointing the finger of blame. That is not how this government of service conducts its business, because it doesn't work. Rather, this was a meeting to pull together our response, a response both to the immediate challenge, which is clearly driven by far-right hatred, but also all violent disorder that flares up, whatever the apparent cause or motivation. We make no distinction. Crime is crime, and so to that end, I can announce today that following this meeting, we will establish a national capability across police forces to tackle violent disorder. These thugs are mobile, they move from community to community, and we must have a policing response that can do the same.
So a new policing response to deal with this kind of violent behaviour. They're talking about local insight and data being used to gain a national understanding of where these criminals are operating, including the British Transport Police alerting when they see a spike in train ticket sales that could be linked to organised violent disorder. They're talking about it, considering how we can deploy facial recognition technology, which is already used by some forces more widely across the country. This will mean criminals can be targeted, found and brought to justice quickly. Now, a lot of people were unhappy with what was presented by Charles on Wednesday's programme, and perhaps what I'm about to present isn't going to make you any happier, because we've got to ask ourselves some serious questions here. The government has responded in this way to what has happened over the last couple of days, or at least this is their claim. They're claiming that this is a response, a direct response to what has happened over the last couple of days. I would suggest to you that actually this is something which has been building up for much, much longer. If we go back to 2017, the UK column was reporting, this is Sajid Javid, and he was saying at that time, ISIS and right-wing extremists both exploit grievances, distort the truth, and undermine the values that hold us together. And this perhaps might seem ironic in some ways, that the UK government of the day was attempting to conflate ISIS terrorists with far-right extremists. This was 2017 or so. We were starting to see this narrative of the rise of far-right extremists starting to build in the mainstream political and media narrative. But if we bring him back on screen again and then move to Nick Basu, who was at that time the Metropolitan Police Counter-Terrorism Assistant Commissioner, he said, "I'm worried that the radicalisation of some of the most vulnerable people in our society, namely our children, is happening both from the Islamist and extreme right-wing ideologies." And again, we're seeing the same narrative, this conflation of left and right, or perception of left and right. Terrorism in the West, said the Henry Jackson Society, an age of extremes, a new pattern of far-right offenders emulating or copying the tactics of high-profile Islamist assailants. And we start to see this narrative being built. It's not organic, it's not happening, it's not grassroots, it's being created by the state. We start to see in the Times, Tory turmoil could lead to a far-right revival. the overt message here, if we look at the text, the return to dominance of the two main parties, which saw Labour and the Conservatives share around 80% of the vote, was one of the most surprising consequences of the referendum 2 years ago. It left many in the centre ground pining for a new party. So this is from 2018, and they're talking about a new extreme right-wing party appearing. And of course, that's exactly what has happened. The Reform Party has appeared. It's mainstream, it's right-wing. It has taken over a certain amount of the narrative from the Conservative Party. And my question is, was that something which happened organically, or was that something that was arranged? In the meantime, we started to see the propaganda. So apps coming out from various police forces around the country, cross the line. How far would you go? This was targeted at the young, all designed to, in inverted commas, prevent the rise of right-wing extremism, when in fact what it was intended to do was the exact opposite. We started to be bombarded with mainstream media headlines. Boris Johnson being spineless about not dealing with the burqa row at the time. The Daily Telegraph, Johnson refuses to back down on burqas. In the meantime, we have burgeoning immigration and the collapse of our infrastructure, putting more pressure on people. The NHS is collapsing, leading medic warns. Thames Water, Sunak and Starmer will both be dreading the most likely option for utility at risk of collapse, and this is right across the country. Other headlines: how do we tackle the UK's housing crisis? So at the same time that they're pumping up migration, and let's just remind ourselves of this graph, 1.2 million people coming into the country in 2023 and 500,000 people leaving the country in 2023. So significant net migration, putting pressure on while the government is allowing infrastructure to collapse. This, of course, puts people in a state of stress, and they start looking for leaders. And the question then is, what kind of leaders do they migrate to? Well, let's bring one of them on screen.
When you see these communities and you see these houses, you think this is a British community, or you might have British Muslims. They are enemy combatants in these houses. In these houses are enemy combatants who want to kill you, maim you and destroy you. They want to destroy our way of life.
Now that's not a peaceful narrative there. This is absolute clash of civilizations narrative that was being pushed out. And who is behind the clash of civilizations ideology? You need to look into that. When we start looking at other leaders, let's look at Tommy Robinson Light. So here's Starmer standing in front of his double cross there. And this morning, who did we have also in front of his double cross? Virtue signaling. What's he telling us here? I'm going to suggest that we are being played. And when we're looking as members of society and citizens and whatnot for people to lead, we've got to be careful about who it is that we are asking to lead. Now, the next point, here's the Metro from a few years ago. London police take the knee with Black Lives Matter protests. Does anybody think that this was by accident? What was this designed to do? It was designed to enrage a certain part of the population. In fact, I'm going to suggest it was designed to radicalize a certain part of the population and drive people towards a right-wing extreme. This is building the right-wing extreme, in my opinion, right? Then over the last couple of days, we've seen this as the Palestine protests have seen other influences begin to move in. Now, Brian and I visited, and Ben as well visited, the Palestine protests some months ago, and we found it to be extremely peaceful, extremely decent people in general. But now we're starting to see this. And if we just zoom in on the flag on the left here, well, first of all, Alan Miller saying ISIS and Hamas flags. Well, let's look at the ISIS flag on the left. This, in fact, is not an ISIS flag. It's an Al-Qaeda flag. But we've got somebody who's masked up there with a red bandana and carrying the flag. Who is this person? What's he doing there? Is he a genuine pro-Palestine protester? I would suggest he is not, because if we look at where that flag comes from, this is the Syrian Revolution Memory Project. And of course, this is the terrorist groups that the British government funded in Syria, the anti-Assad terrorist groups that the British government funded in Syria, now on the streets of Britain, in amongst people protesting what's going on in Gaza. But these people were funded by the British state in Syria And these people have made death threats against Vanessa Beeley, amongst others. So these are not good people. They're not. And my question, therefore, is what are they doing amongst this protest? Are they there to wind up a certain section of the society? And I would just make the point that if we remember this piece of legislation, which is now an act of Parliament, the Covert Human Intelligence Sources Criminal Conduct Bill, and we have to ask ourselves, if we are living in a regime where the government is prepared to say that an agent of the state is able to commit breaches of the law, able to break the law, then to what degree does that end? Where does that end? There's no limitation on these covert intelligence sources, the kinds of laws that they can break. So would it be beyond the British government to be running a psychological operation on us? Let's not forget this lady, Juliet Harkin, formerly BBC Media Action, talking about their efforts to bring opposition onto the streets in Syria. Again, is this the kind of thing that we would not also see in this country? And let me remind you about the integrated operating concept, which is Ministry of Defence doctrine in the UK, making it very clear that the enemy is not just abroad, it's also at home. We are being played. So I'm going to say that if we're going to focus on the enemy as being this lot on the left, we are looking at a symptom, and that is the wrong target. We need to be focusing on the enemy on the right, because this is the disease that is bringing people into the country in the numbers that they're coming into. And there are a number of voices in this country that are operating on behalf of the problem on the right there, because the people that are reacting to those people in the way that they are giving Keir Starmer and his state infrastructure the go-ahead, therefore, to bring in more and more draconian rules, which is supposed to be what we're fighting against in the first place. I'm starting to see things like this on X. The lion had a little growl yesterday. Wait till it effing roars. If the lion roars in a violent way, we are playing into the hands of the state. There are other ways to deal with this. For example, stop funding the state. That might be a place to start. That's a peaceful action that can be taken. Stop funding the state, and they will get the state's attention very quickly. There is no need to go around destroying our own communities in frustration at what's going on around us. And I completely understand and get the frustration, and I understand why the narrative that Tommy Robinson and people like that would put forward would be attractive to people. But I strongly urge that we consider what is happening here and how we are being played. And that's my thoughts on this. Debbie, have you got any comments? Do you disagree with me? I'm quite happy if people disagree with me. You can fight me in the comments and in the chat box and in the forums and on YouTube and so on. But what are your thoughts on this?
Well, good afternoon, everybody. And no, I agree with you, Mike. And I think that this is a deliberate attempt by Keir Starmer to disrupt the British public, to make them angry. Of course, they're angry. Of course, the British public are angry. But he wants us to be angry. He wants division. He wants any excuse to come down hard. And we said that change was going to be happening. And he's only been in government 4 weeks. And I'd say already we're starting to see that. And isn't he the Prime Minister that wants to let out loads of prisoners out of prison early? Is that to disrupt, perhaps?
Very good question. What happens when we start? Well, we can talk about that more in extra. But Debbie,